As the church professes in the creeds, Jesus died and was buried. More than just a placeholder in the passion narrative between the cross and the empty tomb, it is a confession of the truth that our Jesus died, truly died. At the surface level, we're saying that his death was not some kind of magic trick or last-minute escape by which Jesus avoided death. Avoiding death is what sinners seek more than anything, to preserve self just a little longer, staying just a step ahead of death for as long as possible. But Jesus moved toward death, telling his disciples that he would suffer and die. And true to his word, his life ended in death. In the end, he was so dead that others had to take his lifeless body and bury him in a tomb. Death did to him what death does to all, making him completely passive and powerless. Fittingly, on the cross in the Gospel of John, instead of saying, "See what I'm doing," on the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished," with his last breath. Death is what happened to him. But don't get caught thinking that his death has no effect. It was happening to him, but his death is also the end of death. Both of the words finished and end translate the Greek word telos. Telos is the end of something as both completion and goal. The purpose has been achieved, and so it is over. Like when a marathon runner comes to the finish line, the race is over. The goal has been achieved. The race is completed. So what is the purpose of death? Death destroys and makes powerless. That is how death rules over all other powers. Death brings that which is something to nothing. All kingdoms and rulers, authorities and powers finally succumb. Nobody and nothing escapes. One might have a near-death experience, but that just means that death came close but has not yet reached its goal. Death is always lurking, always hanging over you until a real death arrives. Then, death has reached its goal. Its purpose is finished. Death's telos is death. This means that when Jesus died, death is finished with Jesus. Death completed its goal because Jesus really, truly died. At the same time, Jesus was finished with death. So there is a strange struggle occurring here. Can death be the end of Christ, or is Christ the end of death? That is, can death end God's promise of mercy and forgiveness? 1 Corinthians 15, St. Paul quotes God's promise from Isaiah 25:7 and Hosea 13:4, saying, "Death has been swallowed up in victory. O death, I shall be your death." Luther takes this up by teaching on Galatians 3:13. Thus, death clashes against life with full force and is about to conquer it and swallow it. And what it attempts, it accomplishes. But because life was immortal, it emerged victorious when it had been conquered, conquering and killing death in turn. It was a great and dreadful strife when death and life contended. The Prince of Life, who died, is alive and reigns. Through Christ, therefore, death is conquered and abolished in the whole world, so that now it is nothing but a picture of death. In Christ, death is turned into a keepsake memory of something from the past, rather than something that is before us. Whereas most people live believing that death is always coming closer as we move into the future, Jesus puts death behind us. Or, as 1 Corinthians 15:20 says, He is the first fruits of the dead. He has gone ahead of us into death, so that His death is our death, so that death's power to destroy has already happened, and what is before us is only Christ's mercy. And the dominoes continue to fall. Death isn't the only thing that meets its end in Jesus' death, for sin, law, and death are all closely related and depend on one another. The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law, 1 Corinthians 15:56 teaches. And we hear from Romans 4, 5, and 6 that the law brings wrath and increases sin. And the wages of sin is death. But once death is over, so too sin and the law also come to an end. The dead Jesus is gathering up nicknames all over the place. Death of death, curse of the curse. And then comes one more in Romans 10:4. Christ is the end of the law. Where everyone imagined the goal and purpose of the law was to make you righteous, now we hear that the telos of the law is Christ. But what could that mean for the law to come to an end? The law is always giving directions, making demands and accusations, saying, do this and don't do that. But what the law demands, it cannot produce. The demand for righteousness results only in measuring one's progress toward righteousness that never ends until death. But Christ, on the other hand, promises righteousness in faith. Thus, His promise gives what the law cannot produce, and therefore fulfills the law's purpose. Christ is the end of the law, so that there may be righteousness for everyone who believes. Just as with the end of death, therefore, Jesus puts the eternal law behind us. The law remains, but since it has been completed in Christ, it remains forever behind us. That is, as far as Christ's death is ours, sin, law, and death have reached their end for us. For since one has died for all have died.